So I've noticed a bit of a trend growing on some parts of the conservative right about the need to remove the word Judeo from Judeo-Christian values. Now, don't get me wrong, many people on the conservative Christian right support using that term, but there are some who are saying we should drop the Judeo. They say it's wrong, they say it's historically inaccurate. Some say it's a modern invention. Others are claiming that Western civilization is fundamentally Christian and that adding Judeo is just a polite nod, it's politically correct. But here is the great irony of it all that I want to share with you. If we're going to be historically strict, if we're going to be honest about origins, then it's not the Judeo that should make people uncomfortable. It's the Christian. Because Western civilization does not begin with Christianity. It began with the Hebrew Bible. And actually the founders of America were most explicit about how they base so much of their political foundation and values foundation on the Hebrew Bible. Let's rewind. Long before the Roman Empire adopted Christianity, long before medieval Europe built cathedrals, long before the founding fathers wrote the Constitution, there was the Torah. And from the Torah came the most radical ideas the ancient world had ever heard. One personal God. Every human being created in the image of God. Law above kings. Moral limits on power. Justice as a divine command. Social responsibility for all, particularly the vulnerable, the poor, the needy, the sick, widows, orphans. In a pagan world of tribal gods and divine emperors, the Israelites introduced something explosive. No human ruler is divine. Power answers to morality. History has direction, and the individual has dignity. That's not Greco-Roman. That's not medieval. That's ancient Israel. The Ten Commandments weren't just religious rules, they were a moral framework that dethroned tyranny. Compare that to the Code of Hammurabi. Justice depended on class. In the Torah, one law for the native and the stranger. Equality before the law. Sound familiar? When Christianity emerged in the 1st century, it didn't create a new moral universe. It universalized Jewish theology. Jesus himself was Jewish. The apostles were Jewish. The New Testament sits on top of the Hebrew Bible. Christianity's core moral language, covenant, redemption, Messiah, sin, prophecy, is Jewish vocabulary. Even the idea of a linear story of history moving towards redemption, that's straight out of the Tanakh. You can't remove Judeo without removing the foundation. It's like keeping the sequel and pretending the original never existed. Now let's move forward. The Protestant Reformation, the English Bill of Rights, the American Revolution. Where did the founders look for political language? Not just to Athens, not just to Rome, but to the Exodus. The image of escaping tyranny. Covenant as the basis of society. A nation under God, not a king as God. John Adams, one of America's founders and the second president of the United States, once wrote that the Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. And what moral framework saturated early America? Biblical law. Look inside the US Supreme Court. Moses is carved into the marble. The American founders didn't just vaguely like the Hebrew Bible, they quoted it. Much more than they quoted the New Testament, actually. And that's found in their writings, in the monuments of America. They structured political ideas around the Hebrew Bible. They explicitly reference Hebrew political theory. In the 18th century, the most cited political thinker in colonial America wasn't John Locke, it was Deuteronomy. In fact, they saw the Hebrew Republic, as they called it, the Jewish state kingdom that existed 2,000 years ago, as the best foundational template for what they wanted to create, particularly with regard to its limit on the king's power, with its separation of powers, and the way it created a society that shared a universal moral code with regard to its belief in one God and rights coming from that God. Political historian Donald Lutz famously studied thousands of pamphlets from the founding era and found that the Bible was the single most frequently cited source, and within the Bible, Deuteronomy was cited more than any other book. Why Deuteronomy? because it outlines a covenantal political system. Law above rulers, limits on kings, accountability, a moral constitution binding a nation. That is not accidental, that is structural. John Adams wrote that the Hebrews had formed the most perfect republic in antiquity. Benjamin Franklin, during the Constitutional Convention, proposed that the national seal depict Moses leading the Israelites through the Red Sea, fleeing tyranny. Think about that. Not Caesar or Socrates or Augustus, Moses, because Exodus was the political metaphor of the American Revolution. The Puritans before them had already described their journey to America as a new Exodus, a covenant community entering a promised land. Even the concept of a written constitution itself mirrors the biblical covenantal model, a binding legal framework agreed upon by a people under God. Greek democracy influenced process, Roman law influenced structure, but the moral architecture, the idea that a nation answers to divine law, that is Hebraic. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. And now here's where it gets uncomfortable. For nearly 2,000 years, Christian Europe persecuted Jews, often while claiming to defend Christian civilization. So when some today say, let's remove Judeo from Judeo-Christian, it's not just historically sloppy, it echoes an old pattern. Take the Jewish book, take the Jewish God, take the Jewish ethics, but remove the Jewish people. And here's the twist. If you strip Christianity of its Jewish roots, what are you left with? A Roman religion. A faith disconnected from Sinai, detached from covenant, unmoored from the Hebrew prophets. In fact, historically speaking, Christianity depends on Judaism. Judaism stands on Sinai. Christianity stands on Sinai plus the New Testament. If we're tracing origins, it's the Christian that is derivative, not the Judeo. Now, that doesn't mean Western civilization is just Jewish. Greek philosophy matters, Roman law matters, Christian theology shaped Europe profoundly. But to pretend that the Jewish contribution is just cosmetic, that Judeo is optional, that is intellectually dishonest. Monotheism, human dignity, moral universalism, covenantal politics, prophetic justice, social responsibility, family values. These are not footnotes, they are foundations. And maybe, just maybe, the reason some people want to remove Judeo today isn't historical precision, it's discomfort. Because if the moral architecture of the West is deeply Jewish, then the Jewish people are not foreign to Western civilization, they are central to it. And that complicates certain narratives. So, should we remove the Judeo from Judeo-Christian? No. If anything, if you're going to edit the phrase, you'd have to remove the Christian. Because historically, philosophically, and theologically, the story starts with the Jews. And the West knows it, even if some would rather forget. Just quickly, we've all heard of heaven, hell, and the afterlife, and at some point I'm sure you've given it some thought. But the Jewish view is radically different from almost everything you've been taught, and once you hear it, it will change how you understand life itself. Have a watch of the trailer for our new JTV Plus documentary called Heaven, Hell, and the Afterlife, and you can watch the full film right now by clicking the link below in the video description. Across the world, the afterlife is described in simple terms. Heaven above, hell below, the devil waiting to tempt you, and a humanity born in original sin. But Judaism tells a story that is older, deeper, and far more hopeful. Less obsessed with fear and more rooted in purpose. A story where the soul is not born guilty, but born noble. Where the body is not the enemy, but the partner. Where the devil isn't God's rival, but his assistant, because Judaism has no second power. Where hell exists, but not forever. Where heaven exists, but not as the final destination. And where the real end of the human story is resurrection, not escape. Judaism views history as a mission, not a mistake. Other civilizations teach that we are here to earn our way into heaven. Judaism teaches that we are here to bring heaven down to earth. And to understand what happens after we die, we first have to understand why we're here in the first place. In this JTV Plus documentary, we're going to reveal the Jewish vision of life after death. One of the most misunderstood ideas, but if understood correctly, can transform your very understanding of life itself. To watch this JTV Plus documentary and access much more premium content, click on the link in the video description.